Among the towering figures of armored champions stood one figure who looked entirely out of place. He was not covered in shining scales, nor did he carry weapons glowing with alien energy. He was a human, tall, but not enormous, strong, but not monstrous. His armor was plain, scratched from old battles. His sword looked ordinary, nothing like the grand spears and plasma axes the other fighters carried. The crowd laughed as soon as he stepped into the arena. To them, this human was no warrior, just a fragile creature from a backwater world. High above the arena, on a balcony of polished stone, sat the alien princess. She was admired for her beauty, feared for her sharp tongue, and known for her pride. Wearing silver robes and a crown of dark crystal, she leaned forward as her golden eyes studied the human below. Her lips curled into a mocking smile. She raised her voice, making sure everyone could hear. "Look at him," she said, laughter in her tone. "A soft little creature who dares stand among warriors. If this human wins, I shall be his wife forever." The crowd erupted with laughter. Some clapped, others jeered. The words spread like fire, repeated again and again. Her careless vow became the joke of the day. The human's face stayed calm, but inside, his heart burned. He had not come to this place for fame or marriage. His ship had crashed weeks ago on this world. He had been captured and told he could earn freedom only by surviving the tournament. He had no choice. He had to fight. The princess leaned back, her laughter still echoing. To her, it was a cruel game. She never believed a human could last more than a few moments. Her people were tall, strong, and trained from birth to fight. The human was only alive because the guards found him amusing. Now standing in the arena, he was nothing but a fool about to be crushed. But the human thought differently. He tightened his grip on his sword. He had fought in wars before, though not in front of such a crowd. He knew what it meant to stand against giants, to face impossible odds. While the people mocked, he studied every detail. The shape of the arena, the weapons of the champions, the placement of the sun above. He was a soldier, and soldiers survived by thinking, not just by swinging steel. The announcer, a deep-voiced alien elder, raised his staff. The arena grew quiet. "Let the first contest begin," he roared. The gates opened, and a massive alien warrior stepped out. His skin was dark blue, his body covered in heavy armor. In his hand, he carried a double-headed axe almost as tall as the human. The crowd cheered wildly. This warrior was famous, a champion undefeated for years. He walked toward the human like a predator, each step shaking the ground. The human could hear the princess's laughter once more, ringing from above like a bell of mockery. The human raised his sword and took a slow breath. He knew he was outmatched in size and strength, but size alone never won battles. He remembered training back on Earth, his old commander telling him that patience and timing could turn even the weakest fighter into a victor. He shifted his stance, light on his feet, waiting. The alien swung his axe with terrifying force, the blade crashing down like lightning. The ground cracked where it struck, dust flying into the air. The human had already moved, rolling aside, the axe missing by inches. The crowd gasped, surprised he had not been split in half on the first strike. The alien growled, raising the axe again, this time swinging sideways. The human ducked under it, feeling the wind of the weapon rush past his head. The fight continued. Again and again the alien attacked with heavy blows, and again, the human dodged. He moved quickly, wasting no energy, letting the giant tire himself out. Some in the crowd began to notice his strategy. The mocking laughter slowly turned into murmurs of surprise. Even the princess stopped smiling for a moment, narrowing her eyes as she watched. Minutes passed. The giant warrior was sweating under his armor, his swings growing slower. The human, breathing hard but steady, saw his chance. When the alien raised the axe for another heavy strike, the human darted forward instead of back. He slid past the giant's arm and struck with his sword, not at the chest, not at the head, but at the joint of the armor near the leg. The blade cut deep. The alien roared in pain, stumbling. The crowd exploded with shock. No one had ever seen the champion wounded like this. The human did not waste time. He struck again, quick and sharp, forcing the alien to fall to his knees. The giant dropped his axe with a crash, his strength gone. The announcer raised his staff, declaring the human the winner of the first round. The arena filled with both cheers and angry cries. Some still mocked, calling it luck. Others shouted, in disbelief, their voices shaking the air. The princess sat silent, her mocking smile frozen on her lips. For the first time, she looked at the human not as a joke, but as a threat to her pride. She had promised before thousands that she would be his wife if he won. It had been a careless laugh, but now, with the first round over, it felt heavier than she expected. The human stood in the center of the arena, chest rising and falling with each breath. He did not raise his arms in victory, nor did he taunt his enemy. He simply looked up at the balcony where the princess sat. His eyes held no arrogance, only determination. He was not there for her games. He was there to survive. The drums boomed, again calling the warriors back. The announcer spoke of the next trial, promising greater challenges ahead. The human wiped the sweat from his brow, preparing himself. The first fight had been hard, but he knew the next would be worse. Around him, the laughter and mockery had not vanished, but it had weakened. Some voices had changed. Some now whispered of the human's strange courage. The princess leaned forward once more, her golden eyes burning with a mix of anger and curiosity. She told herself it was only luck. One fight meant nothing. The human would fail soon, and her careless words would be forgotten. Still, deep in her chest, a small feeling she could not explain began to grow, a feeling she quickly pushed away. The human gripped his sword tightly and waited for the next gate to open. He knew this was only the beginning. The arena's air grew heavier as the announcer's deep voice echoed across the stone walls. The drums beat like thunder, shaking the ground beneath the fighters' feet. The crowd was restless, still buzzing after the human's shocking victory in the first round. Some shouted that it was pure luck. Others whispered that there was more to this fragile-looking warrior than anyone had guessed. The princess sat on her high balcony, her chin resting on one hand. Her golden eyes stayed fixed on the human below. She had laughed at him before, but now her pride burned hotter. She reminded herself that one victory meant nothing. The next trial would crush him, and her careless words would fade like smoke. Yet still, she could not ignore the small shiver of doubt curling inside her chest. The announcer raised his staff. "The second trial shall test agility and skill," he roared. "Let the next champion enter." The iron gates creaked open. From the shadows stepped another alien warrior, tall and lean, her body wrapped in armor that shimmered like silver glass. She carried two curved blades that reflected the sunlight. Her movements were graceful, sharp, and fast, like a predator, circling prey. The crowd cheered her name. She was known as the Whisper of Blades, a fighter who ended battles before her enemies could even breathe. The human tightened his grip on his sword. He had faced brute strength before, but this would be different. His opponent's speed was her greatest weapon, and one mistake would mean defeat. He drew a steady breath, lowering into a stance. He remembered the words of his old commander, back on Earth. Never fight the enemy's fight. Make them fight yours. The Whisper of Blades bowed slightly, a warrior's sign of respect, though her golden eyes held no kindness. Then, without warning, she rushed forward, her blades flashing like streaks of lightning. The human barely blocked the first strike. Sparks flew as metal clashed against metal. The second blade cut the air near his side, missing by inches. He stepped back, but she was already there, striking again. The crowd roared in approval at her speed. The human moved carefully, always keeping his sword between them. His arms ached from blocking so many blows. He knew he couldn't win by matching her speed. Instead, he let her drive him backward, closer to the edge of the arena. Dust rose under their feet as the battle danced across the stone floor. The princess leaned forward, her mocking smile returning. "He is nothing but a shield waiting to break," she said loudly enough for those near her to hear. The crowd laughed with her, but their eyes stayed fixed on the fight. The Whisper of Blades pressed harder, her strikes faster and faster, but The human's patience never broke. He let her believe she controlled the fight. He watched her movements, memorizing the rhythm of her steps. Each warrior had patterns, even the fastest. And then when the moment came, he saw it. Just the smallest hesitation when she switched hands. The human acted. Instead of stepping back, he lunged forward. His sword did not aim for her body, but for her foot. The strike hit the ground, kicking up dust and stone fragments. The sudden move startled her. She stumbled half a step, her balance broken. In that tiny moment, the human's shoulder slammed into her chest, knocking her to the ground. The arena gasped. The whisper of blades rolled quickly and tried to rise, but the human pressed his sword to her neck before she could recover. The announcer lifted his staff. The victor, human! The crowd erupted into chaos. Some cheered wildly, unable to deny what they had seen. Others shouted in anger, refusing to accept that a human could defeat one of their swiftest champions. The whisper of blades lowered her blades and bowed her head in defeat. She gave the human a nod of respect, something no one had expected. On the balcony, the princess clenched her hands on the stone rail. Her mocking laughter had died in her throat. Twice now the human had faced champions she thought unbeatable. Twice he had won. Her vow, spoken in jest, began to feel like a chain tightening around her own pride. The announcer raised his staff again, calling for silence. The human has survived 2 trials, he thundered. Now he faces the third. The trial of endurance. The crowd buzzed louder, eager for the next contest. The gates opened again, and this time, instead of 1 opponent, 3 stepped into the arena. They were not champions, but brutal soldiers, known for overwhelming foes through relentless attack. Each carried heavy clubs that looked as if they could smash stone. The human's heart beat faster. 1 opponent was difficult enough. 3 at once was a death sentence. Still, he raised his sword, refusing to back down. The battle began at once. The 3 soldiers charged together, their clubs swinging like hammers. The human dodged, barely avoiding a strike that cracked the ground. He rolled to the side, his sword flashing to parry another blow. The 3rd soldier's club grazed his shoulder, sending pain shooting through his body. The crowd screamed with excitement. Many believed it was over. The princess even stood, expecting to watch him fall. But the human fought with more than strength. He fought with stubborn will. He used the soldiers' size against them, moving so they blocked each other's strikes. Twice he ducked at the last moment, causing their heavy clubs to smash together. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The human's arms trembled, with exhaustion. His breath came ragged, but his eyes never gave up. Finally, as one soldier lifted his club for a killing strike, the human darted inside his guard and struck the back of his knee. The giant roared and collapsed. The other 2 attacked in fury, but the human kept moving, using the fallen soldier's body as cover. He struck again, disarming one of them. With a desperate final effort, he kicked the last soldier backward into the arena wall. Dust rained down as the warrior slumped, defeated. Silence filled the arena. The human stood in the middle, bent over, blood on his arm and sweat on his brow. He could barely lift his sword, but he was still standing. Slowly, the announcer lifted his staff. The victor, again, the human. This time the cheers were louder than the jeers. The people could no longer ignore what they had seen. He was not just lucky. He was strong in ways their champions had never been tested. The whispers of respect grew louder, spreading like fire through the crowd. The princess sat frozen, her heart pounding. She had mocked him, laughed at him, sworn before all that if he won, she would be his wife forever. At first it was only a joke, an insult. But now each victory dragged her closer to that vow. And for the first time she felt something she had never expected. Fear. The human lifted his head, his eyes finding hers across the distance. There was no arrogance in his gaze, no demand, only quiet determination, the look of a man who would keep fighting until the very end. The drums boomed again, announcing the coming of the 4th trial. The crowd roared, ready for more. But in that brief silence between the echoes, the princess's mocking laughter no longer filled the air. Instead, her golden eyes followed the human with something far more dangerous: curiosity. The tournament, was not over. The greatest challenges still waited ahead, but already the human had changed the arena. He had turned laughter into respect and jest into prophecy. And the princess, though she tried to deny it, felt the weight of her own words, pressing down on her more with every beat of the drums. The air in the arena felt heavier than before. Dust floated in the sunlight, hanging in the air like a silent curtain over the battlefield. The human stood in the center, his body trembling from exhaustion. His shoulder bled from a cut, and sweat ran down his face. Yet his eyes stayed sharp, focused, unbroken. The crowd, once filled with mocking laughter, had grown restless in a different way. Their voices no longer carried the same certainty. Some still shouted insults demanding the human's defeat, but others had begun to cheer for him. The sound was mixed now, a clash of disbelief and rising respect. The princess sat high above, her fingers tapping against the stone rail. She had promised before all that if the human won, she would marry him. She had laughed when she said it, her voice sharp and proud. At first it had been nothing but a cruel joke, but now, after 3 trials, her words echoed back at her like chains. The human was not falling as she had expected. He was rising higher, climbing closer to her vow with every step. She leaned back in her seat, her golden eyes narrowed. "It cannot last," she whispered to herself. "He is weak. He will break." But even as she spoke, she felt the doubt inside her heart grow stronger. The announcer raised his staff. "The 4th trial begins now, a test of willpower and courage." The gates opened slowly. From the shadows came a monstrous figure, a beast-like warrior covered in thick armor plates, his head crowned with horns. His weapon was a long chain with a spiked ball at the end, swinging through the air with a whistle that made the crowd shiver. He was known as the Iron Beast, a fighter who broke bones with a single strike. The human tightened his grip on his sword. His arms ached, and his legs felt heavy, but he could not stop now. He had survived 3 trials, and he knew stopping here would mean his death. He took a deep breath and readied himself. The Iron Beast charged forward, his chain spinning, above his head. The first strike came fast, slamming into the ground near the human with such force that stone shattered. Dust rose, and the human stumbled back, barely keeping his balance. The chain swung again, this time toward his chest. He dropped low, rolling under it, feeling the wind of the weapon pass inches above him. The crowd roared with excitement. The princess leaned forward, unable to look away. Her mocking smile was gone. Her lips were pressed into a thin line as her eyes followed every move. The human knew he couldn't block the chain. It was too heavy, too powerful. Instead, he focused on movement, dodging left and right, rolling away, staying close to the ground. Each strike shook the arena floor, but each time he avoided the killing blow. The Iron Beast growled in frustration. He swung harder, faster, the chain whistling through the air like a storm. The human ducked behind a broken piece of stone wall, using it as cover. The chain smashed it into pieces, the stones scattering like glass. The human barely escaped, his heart pounding. He could not last like this forever. His body was already at its limit. He needed a plan. As he dodged another strike, his eyes caught the chain itself. It was heavy, but it moved in a pattern. Every swing had a rhythm, and every rhythm had a weakness. The next time the chain came down, the human did not run. He stepped forward, sword in hand, and struck at the chain itself. Sparks flew as metal met metal. His sword did not break the chain, but it shifted its path, causing the spiked ball to slam into the arena wall instead of him. The Iron Beast stumbled, caught off balance. The human pressed forward, not with strength but with timing. He slashed at the warrior's arm where the armor was weakest. The blade cut deep. The beast roared, pulling back in pain. The human struck again, faster this time, pushing with every ounce of strength left in his body. Finally, with one last effort, he forced the Iron Beast to his knees. The crowd fell silent. The announcer raised his staff high. "The victor, once again, the human." The arena shook with noise. This time, the cheers were louder than the jeers. The people could no longer deny it. The human was not just surviving, he was winning. The princess sat frozen, Her golden eyes stayed locked on him. She felt something strange in her chest, a mix of anger and admiration. She had mocked him, laughed at him, promised herself to him as a joke. Now, with every victory, that promise became real. She clenched, her fists, her pride screaming against it. But deep inside, a part of her heart whispered something else. The human, standing in the center of the arena, raised his head. His eyes met hers again. There was no smile on his face, no taunt, no arrogance. Only determination, calm and steady, as if to say he would not stop until the end. The princess felt her breath catch for the briefest moment, and she quickly turned away. The announcer's voice boomed once more. The human has passed 4 trials, only one remains. The final duel, the greatest challenge of all. The crowd erupted into wild cheers, their voices shaking the very walls of the arena. They wanted to see how far this human could go. They wanted to see if the impossible could happen. The princess rose from her seat, her silver robes flowing behind her. She looked down at the human, her voice sharp as she shouted so all could hear. Do not believe this will last, human. The final trial will break you, and when you fall, my words will vanish with you. The crowd hushed, waiting for his reply, but the human said nothing. He simply raised his sword in silent defiance, his eyes never leaving hers. The silence carried more weight than words. The princess's heart pounded. For the first time in her life, she felt unsure. She had faced generals, kings, and warriors who bowed at her feet. Yet here was a human, an outsider, mocked and laughed, and standing tall before her, unbroken. And the worst part was, she was no longer laughing. The drums began again, slow and heavy, announcing the preparation for the final duel. The people stamped their feet, their excitement growing louder and louder. The human turned his gaze away from the balcony and back to the arena gates. His body ached. His blood ran warm down his arm, but his spirit burned brighter than ever. He had come this far. He would not stop now. The princess sat back down slowly, her thoughts in turmoil. She had never believed her vow would mean anything. But now, with the final trial ahead, she realized the truth. If he won, she would belong to him forever. And as much as her pride resisted, a part of her, small, hidden, and unwilling to admit, was no longer afraid of that fate. The crowd waited. The announcer prepared. The final trial loomed. The human closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deep. He had survived strength, speed, and endurance. Now, everything would come down to this last battle. He whispered to himself, words only he could hear. One more fight. And as the arena drums thundered into the sky, the alien princess, once so full of laughter and pride, found herself silent, watching not a joke but a man who had turned her vow into destiny. The arena fell into silence as the heavy gates creaked open once more. Dust hung in the air, glowing faintly in the red sunlight. Every pair of eyes turned toward the shadows, waiting for the final opponent to step out. The human stood ready, his sword gripped firmly despite the blood on his arm and the trembling of his legs. He knew this would be his last trial, either his greatest victory or his end. The crowd held its breath. Then, from the darkness, the champion appeared. He was a giant among giants, taller than any the human had faced. His armor was black steel, etched with glowing red patterns that pulsed like fire. In his hands rested a massive warhammer, its head as wide as the human's chest. The ground shook with every step he took. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena. Behold, the Warlord of Stone, undefeated in all battles, crusher of armies, breaker of champions. He is the final trial. The crowd exploded into cheers, their voices rising like a storm. They shouted the warlord's name, chanting in rhythm with the pounding of drums. To them, this was the end. No one had ever defeated the Warlord of Stone. No one had even survived long against him. High above, the alien princess stood, her silver robes flowing in the hot wind. Her golden eyes burned as she stared down at the human. Her lips trembled, though she tried to keep her face proud. She had mocked him, laughed at him, promised herself to him as a joke. Now, with the final duel upon them, She felt the full weight of her vow pressing down. If he won, there would be no escaping her words. The warlord slammed his hammer against the ground, sending a deep echo through the stone floor. The human tightened his grip on his sword and took a deep breath. He had faced strength, speed, and endurance before, but this battle was something more. This was against pure power, the kind that could crush mountains. The announcer lowered his staff. "Begin!" The warlord charged, his hammer swinging high. The human darted aside, the weapon crashing into the ground with a force that shook the arena. Stone cracked, sending dust and rock flying. The human rolled to his feet, his sword ready. He struck quickly, aiming for a weak point in the warlord's armor. The blade scraped harmlessly off the thick plates. The warlord laughed, a deep, booming sound. "You are nothing but a fly, human. I will end this with one blow." He swung, again the hammer sweeping in a wide arc. The human ducked low, the weapon passing so close he could feel the wind of its strike. He knew he could not match this monster's strength. He could not block the hammer, not even once. His only chance was to move, to stay alive long enough, to find an opening. The battle became a storm. The warlord's hammer slammed down again and again, each strike breaking the stone floor into pieces. The human dodged, rolled, and leapt aside, his body burning with pain from every movement. His sword flashed whenever he found a chance, striking at joints and seams. But the warlord's armor was too strong. The crowd roared with every clash. Some shouted for the warlord to crush him. Others, surprisingly, began to cheer for the human, urging him to keep moving, to keep fighting. Their voices mixed together in a storm of sound that shook the sky. The princess leaned forward, her heart racing. She told herself she wanted him to fall, to free her from the vow she had made. But when the hammer barely missed his head, her hands clenched on the stone rail and she felt something she had never expected: fear for him. The human's breath came ragged, his vision blurring. His body screamed for rest, but his mind stayed sharp. He remembered every lesson, every battle he had survived in his past. A giant's strength is its weakness. The heavier the blow, the slower the recovery. He waited. The warlord raised, his hammer for a massive strike, lifting it high above his head. The human knew this was his chance. As the hammer came crashing down, he rolled forward instead of back. The weapon slammed into the stone where he had stood, shattering the ground. The warlord pulled at the hammer, but for a brief moment it was stuck in the broken stone. The human lunged. His sword flashed, striking at the gap under the warlord's arm. The blade pierced through, drawing a roar of pain. The crowd gasped, in shock. The warlord tore the hammer free and swung wildly, forcing the human back, but now blood ran down his armor. The human's chest heaved, his strength nearly gone. But he pressed on, striking again and again at the weak spot he had found. The warlord grew angrier, his attacks wilder, his movements less precise. The human dodged by inches, his body moving only because his spirit refused to give up. Finally, the moment came. The warlord lifted his hammer high for one last crushing blow. The human stepped inside the arc, his sword thrusting upward with all the strength left in him. The blade pierced through the gap in the armor at the warlord's chest. The giant stumbled, his eyes wide with shock. The hammer slipped from his hands and crashed to the ground. The warlord fell to his knees, then collapsed face first into the dust. Silence filled the arena. The human stood over him, swaying, barely able to hold his sword. His chest rose and fell in heavy breaths. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Then the announcer lifted his staff high. "The victor," his voice thundered, shaking the walls, "is the human." The arena erupted. The crowd's roar was deafening, louder than thunder, shaking the very ground. Some screamed in disbelief, others cheered with joy, but all knew they had witnessed something no one had thought possible. The human had done the impossible. He had defeated the warlord of stone. The princess stood frozen on her balcony. Her lips parted, her eyes wide. She could not believe what she had seen. The vow she had spoken as a joke now burned like fire in her ears. "If he wins, I'll be his wife forever." The words echoed inside her, chains she could not break. The human lifted his head slowly, his tired eyes meeting hers once more. He said nothing, but his gaze carried all the weight of his victory. It was not arrogance. It was not triumph. It was simply truth. The princess's heart raced. For the first time in her life, she felt her pride weaken. She had mocked him, laughed at him, dismissed him as nothing. And now he had done what no warrior of her people had ever achieved. He had turned her words into destiny. The announcer's voice rang out again. The tournament is complete. By her own vow, spoken before all, the princess shall now belong to the human forever. The crowd shouted louder, their chants shaking the arena. Some cheered for honor, others mocked the princess for her careless words, but all eyes turned to her. She stood still, her golden eyes locked on the human. Her heart warred inside her, pride against respect, anger against something new she dared not name. Slowly, she lifted her chin, forcing her voice to remain steady. "So be it," she said. The human lowered his sword, his body trembling but his spirit unbroken. The final duel was over. He had won. The arena still echoed with the thunder of the crowd. Some voices shouted the human's name, others called out the princess's vow, and some simply cheered in disbelief. Dust settled slowly over the broken stones where the warlord of stone had fallen. The smell of battle hung heavy in the air. The human stood at the center, leaning on his sword for support. His chest rose and fell in sharp breaths, his body trembling from exhaustion. Blood stained his arm and leg, but his spirit burned steady. He had survived, he had won. Against all odds, he had done the impossible. The announcer raised his staff once more. His voice boomed across the arena. The tournament is ended. The human has claimed victory in all 5 trials. By the vow spoken by the princess before the eyes of the people, he is now her eternal husband. The words shook the crowd into a frenzy. Some cheered in excitement, others shouted in disbelief, but none could deny the truth. A vow spoken before all could not be broken. The princess sat still on her high balcony. Her golden eyes stared at the human below, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. She remembered her laughter, sharp and mocking, as she had declared her vow. She had believed it impossible. Yet here she stood, bound by her own words. She rose slowly, her silver robes brushing against the polished stone. The crowd fell quiet as she stepped forward. Every gaze turned to her, waiting for her response. She lifted her chin, her voice carrying strong across the arena. "My words cannot be taken back," she said, her tone steady though her heart wavered inside her. "I vowed before all that if this human won, I would be his wife forever. And so it shall be. By honor, by law, and by my own voice, I am bound." Gasps swept through the arena. Some cheered wildly at her courage to accept her vow. Others whispered, in shock, unable to believe that their proud princess would now belong to the very man she had mocked. The human raised his head, his tired eyes meeting hers. He did not smile. He did not boast. He only nodded, a quiet sign of respect. For him, this was not about pride or conquest. It was about survival and now honor. The princess felt something stir inside her chest. A strange mix of anger, respect, and something softer she could not yet name. She looked away quickly, unwilling to let her people see the storm in her heart. Guards entered the arena and approached the human, offering him water and bandages. He accepted, though he refused to be carried. His steps were slow, heavy, but he walked upright. The people watched him, their cheers still echoing. Some bowed their heads in respect. Others whispered of destiny. That night, the city was alive with voices. Taverns rang with stories of the human who had defeated every champion. Markets buzzed with talk of the princess's vow. Children ran through the streets, pretending to be the human with wooden swords. His name spread like fire, and with it, a new legend was born. Inside the palace, the princess sat alone in her chambers. The silver crown rested beside her, and the moonlight shone through the tall windows. She replayed the battles in her mind. She remembered how she had laughed at him, certain he would fall at the first strike. She remembered her growing unease as he won again and again. And she remembered the final duel, the moment when he stood tall against the impossible and won. Her pride resisted. Her pride. She wanted to dismiss him, to call it luck. But her heart whispered the truth. He had earned his victory. No excuse could change that. The sound of the door opening pulled her from her thoughts. She turned, and there he was, the human, dressed, in clean clothes, his wounds wrapped in fresh bandages. He moved slowly, but his eyes still carried the same steady determination. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken words. At last the princess spoke. "You have forced my vow to bind me," she said, her voice firm but quiet. "I mocked you, and now my own pride has trapped me. Tell me, human, what do you want?" Deda. Human's reply was calm, simple. "I want nothing that is not freely given. I did not fight to own you, I fought to survive, but I will honor the vow as you must." His words struck her like a blade. She had expected arrogance, demands, or triumph. Instead, he offered respect. He did not boast, did not claim victory over her. He simply stood as a man of honor. The princess felt her chest tighten. She looked away, her voice softer now. "You are not like the others. You do not seek glory, yet glory follows you. You do not claim power, yet power has become yours. I do not understand you. You don't have to," the human said. "Understanding takes time, and time, it seems, is something we now have." Her golden eyes flickered back to his, and for the first time she did not see him as a fragile creature. She saw him as a warrior, as someone who had faced death and refused to yield. And deep inside, she felt a spark of something she dared not admit aloud. Admiration. Days turned into weeks. The human healed slowly, his strength returning. The people of the city grew divided. Some resented him, others celebrated him, but none ignored him. He trained in the palace courtyards, his movements watched by curious eyes. The princess, though she tried to keep her distance, often found herself watching from the shadows. She saw how he treated her people with respect, how he spoke to servants with kindness, how he carried himself without pride. He did not act like a conqueror. He acted like a man simply living with honor. And slowly, her heart began to shift. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and red, the princess approached him in the courtyard. Her voice was quiet. "When I made that vow, I laughed because I believed it impossible. I thought you were weak, but you proved stronger than all I knew, stronger than me. Tell me, human, how do you keep standing when the world itself tries to break you?" The human looked at her, his face calm. "Because giving up has never been an option. Where I come from, we keep moving forward, no matter how heavy the burden. That is what it means to be human." The princess's heart stirred at his words. She felt her pride soften, replaced by something warmer. She realized that what she had, once mocked, now filled her with wonder. The story spread across the stars of the proud princess who mocked a human and was bound by her own vow. But within the palace it became something more. A bond began to form, not of chains or pride, but of respect and growing trust. The princess, once so certain of her superiority, now looked at the human with new eyes. And the human, who had asked for nothing but survival, now found himself at the center of a destiny greater than he had ever imagined. The vow that began as a jest had become truth. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. The princess would never again laugh at the human in mockery, for in her heart, laughter had turned to respect, and respect had begun to grow into something stronger. And so, the story of the human and the princess did not end with the tournament. It began there, born in laughter, forged in battle, and sealed by honor.